Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Leeson. I'm your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier, and I am delighted to see everybody here today on January the 11th, 2023, the year of our Lord. I hope you're, pardon me, 2024. That's almost a Freudian slip. I'm still living in the previous year here, but I hope your year is off to a great start to you and your family. And it's always exciting when a new year happens, and we can look forward to the possibilities. And so we thought it would be really apropos to have a bit of a chat today on live with everybody on both YouTube and X. So a welcome to everybody, and especially if you're new. We wanted to talk about hopes and fears, perhaps dreams, opportunities, however you want to characterize those important words when it comes to looking, touching base a little bit about the year that was and looking to the year that can be. So in our country today, it's almost mind-numbing and turning heads when it comes to the number of issues that we face today. And so I am very delighted to have two very special guests and friends on the program. We have Peter Holle, the president of the Frontier Center for Public Policy, as well as Leighton Gray, a senior fellow with Frontier, but also constitutional lawyer. And there's so much I could tell you about these two gentlemen, but we'll probably kind of peel the onion with them a little bit. But it's really an interesting opportunity. So a warm welcome to both you, Leighton, and Peter.
Well, thanks, David. Glad to be here.
Thanks, David. I'll take anything warm right now. It's about 33 below where I'm at. I am at Cold Lake, Alberta. So,
okay, so let's just dive into the topic of temperature, because that's a hot topic, so to speak. So you said your temperature is minus what, Leighton?
33 below in Cold Lake, and I was telling you, gentlemen, before I came on air, it was a bit of a shock because only a few days ago on Sunday I was in Mexico and it was 33 above. It was beautiful and sunny. So quite a shock. You know, our friend, senior fellow of the Frontier, Dr. Moore, Patrick Moore, is telling everybody, and I think correctly, I certainly subscribe his opinion that we're in the midst of an ice age. And today in Alberta, it sure feels like it.
Oh my gosh. What about you, Peter? How are things in Winnipeg?
We're at minus 15. We've had lots of snow overnight. And then the weather, Leighton's weather is supposed to arrive here, I think, tomorrow night. So it's going to get cold this weekend. It's the first weekend where we have below normal temperatures. We've had a marvelous set of temperatures right through Christmas. And nobody's complaining as far as I could see about that.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's great. That's thanks to Mr. Gibault, Peter, because, you know, he just was named Policymaker of the Year.
Right. That's right. So those temperatures, we see are they using the term again, polar vortex, to make its way across the continent? All these new weather terms, I've never heard of them before, between polar vortex and what's the other one? Atmospheric rivers and what else?
Yeah.
Well, I saw a headline of minus 55 is coming. Okay, yes. So that was wind chill, but it's the first time I've ever seen them put the wind chill into a headline. So it'll be, I don't know, minus 30 plus some wind chill.
All right. Well, we certainly know that weather's a concern, and Leighton, you've referenced that whole conversation about this existential threat of climate change, or that the world's coming to an end, a la Greta Thunberg.
Yes.
With her finger wagging at us.
Yes.
How dare you? So do you think that whole issue around climate change, and I mean this sincerely, I know that there's a vigorous scientific debate. We've talked with colleagues like Dr. William Happer from Princeton and so many others, Dr. Patrick Moore, one of the co-founders of Greenpeace, that in fact there is a debate about climate, and there is no consensus, as former President Barack Obama asserted so many years ago, that there's a consensus in science. What an asinine thing to say. So in this context, do you think the whole climate narrative, because the left always likes to reference narratives, do you think that's breaking down a little bit, Leighton? And then I'll go to you, Peter. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I do. First of all, we have to, of course, acknowledge, even though this has never been explained to me, that there is no causal nexus or relationship between weather and climate David. So we just have to acknowledge that.
Okay.
If one of you can explain to me why that's not true, I don't know. It seems to me weather is what we have today, and climate is what we have over time. But I think I agree with you. I think that the environmental scare is losing steam. I think in 2020 we were exposed to a government declared health crisis. In 2022 we had a government declared climate crisis. And I think what's coming in 2024 is we're going to have a government declared financial crisis, not just declared, but engineered. And
Wow.
I think that I was reading a story yesterday that the federal NDP party was very overt about saying that they are fundraising. They need to fundraise because there's going to be an election in 2024. Yes. And as we all know, they have their finger, or Mr. Singh has his finger on that button. And so I think that the federal Liberals, they won the last two elections in 2019 and 2021 based upon fear. That has been a very successful strategy for them. It was successful for the Democrats in 2020. And I think we're going to get this again. We're going to get told that there's a financial crisis. A lot of people are already in a financial crisis. We're going to get the Liberals are going to run on an election where they're going to solve all the problems. As we know, this is small L liberal politics 101. You create an imaginary crisis. You do whatever you can to cause it to happen, and then you promise people that you're going to come in and solve it. So that's something that I'm watching for in 2024.
Okay, so Leighton, you've raised the flag on the theme of fear and how that's used often not as good public policy, but as a way to manipulate decision making. Well, what do you think, Peter? Do you think are you fearful of the oncoming climate crisis?
Well, we've been the think tank that's been the most skeptical for the longest time, and I don't think anything has changed. We've seen weather like this before. We're watching all the rioting and protests across Europe. The German farmers are, of course, upset. Again, we have, these. I call it the climate blob, raising taxes, raising the price of energy, raising the price of food. And I think people have had it. We're watching the election of, people so-called far right, whatever that means in Holland. The biggest party now in Germany is the AfD, which is essentially a conservative party. And they're the biggest party. And so, no, I think the folk on the street they've had enough, and we'll see. And I agree with you, Leighton, that of course the manipulations and so on, they're going to continue, but I think people are getting tired of it.
I think that's true, Peter. And just another note, I know that you very much like EVs, and I think it's great if people like EVs that they should buy them. I like my gas guzzler because I'm an Albertan. Just kidding. But I noticed that there was a story today that Hertz Rental Car, one of the largest rental car companies in the world, they're going to sell 20,000 EVs and they're going to shift back to gas-powered cars. And of course, I think this is a way of the market, people in the market who buy a lot of cars, sort of regurgitating back at the Democrats in the U.S. and the Liberals in Canada, regurgitating back, saying, "Listen, we're not going to." We're not going to stop making or using gas-powered cars by 2035.
Right on. So I do want to point to the audience and ask you, what do you think? Are you in fear as you look to 2024? Do you have confidence that people are waking up and pushing back like they are, as Peter referenced, in Germany and the Netherlands? What do you think? Please pose your questions to the chat, and we'd love to hear from you. And also, please subscribe to the channels here. Make sure that you pass on what you're hearing. We would love to hear from you and also spread the word. So when we look at this issue, that's a big one. And I think part of the context of this issue that's so important to Canadians is the so-called crack in the carbon tax policy. As you saw, the federal government trying to hive off its application of the carbon tax on home heating oil for Atlantic Canada. So what do you think about carbon taxes? And have they had their day? Are they going to be, have they seen their day? Are people seeing through the fraud that carbon taxes for what they are?
I think
Because I tell you, it sure does cost people a lot of money. It's like a
You're,
war
you're,
on the
you-
middle class. What do you think?
you're
Peter?
using the language of carbon tax, David. It should be called carbon dioxide tax. Most people don't know that. Carbon is, to many people, soot, something black, something dirty.
Yes.
The whole theory of carbon dioxide being pollution, and we need to clamp down and stop it. It's just insanity. I'm sorry, people don't hear that, but we are at relatively low levels of carbon dioxide on historical basis.
Well, so wait a sec, Peter. So you're saying that carbon dioxide is not a pollution? That's totally opposite to what we hear out there. I mean, that's what
It's the gas of life. It's what we pump into greenhouses when we want to have plants grow quicker.
Okay.
It's plant food, okay? And again, if you look at carbon dioxide, they call it a trace gas because we have very small amounts of it in the atmosphere. Most of it's caused by natural sources like volcanoes, forest fires, ocean evaporation. The human portion of CO2 being produced, to make a long story short, is the equivalent of 6 pennies in a jar of 10,000 pennies. And and for sorry, and to have a policy designed around fighting the 6 pennies out of 10,000 and destroying our economy and raising costs and
Wow.
causing all sorts of havoc, it's really insanity.
It's unbelievable. I think most Canadians would be shocked to hear that insight. So you're saying that if you had the amount of carbon dioxide produced, well, first of all, you're saying that carbon dioxide is actually critical, foundational to life as we know it. And I know that not too far from here, I've got all kinds of greenhouses where they pump carbon dioxide into the greenhouses to grow the plants better. So, okay, so I buy that, and that's scientifically a fact. But you're saying that human caused carbon dioxide is really not creating this big crisis again.
Not at all. And again, the drivers of climate, and again, I think we all know it's really the sun, it's the elliptical orbit of the Earth around the sun and so on. No coincidence that we had ice ages when, the Earth was far away from the sun, and therefore less energy was hitting the Earth.
Here you are. Here's Patrick.
Oh, so no, there is no connection between CO2 and temperature. And again, famously, the Al Gore graphs had the lines backwards, and basically the CO2 levels would rise after the temperature went up, and Al Gore had them backwards. Okay, so again, there's lots and lots of urban legend going on here, and the fact that it's turning our economies upside down and basically destroying our living standard. It really is crazy.
It really is. So Leighton, if it's not about saving the climate, and we all obviously care about the climate deeply, what the heck is going on? Why do we hear all this alarmism, fear? You referenced the word fear just a few minutes ago. Why is that being underlined everywhere you turn now? Like, what is, in your mind, the real agenda here in terms of action?
Well, before answering that, I just want to recommend to folks who are listening and watching a wonderful book. I mentioned Dr. Patrick Moore. He's written several books that are all brilliant, but one called Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom, where he systematically takes apart every single one of these
It's a great book.
hoaxes.
Yeah.
Peter talked about some of them, but it's just brilliantly written, and it's the best kind of science for people who are not scientists. He just says it's an incredible way of...
So Patrick Moore is a senior fellow at Frontier. He's had a lot of visibility across the environmental movement, particularly as one of the co-founders of an organization called Greenpeace. So this is a person who is not only a scientist, he's also a activist and environmentalist. And so, I think that's a great book, Leighton.
Yeah. There's a couple others too that I just want to mention. One is a Michael Schellenberger book, and another one by Bjorn Lomborg. And those two authors have a different take on this climate scare. What they say is that there may be a climate contribution from CO2, even though it only makes up about 0.04% of the atmosphere. But they say that actually it's not going to have the kind of economic impacts that people like the UN and the WEF are, and of course the Canadian government are talking about. Coming back to your question, David, my view is that if you think of the word green, that word goes back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, and it used to be red communism. And it's simply everything green now is repackaged Marxism. And this is why you mentioned Greta Thunberg. This is why, they villainized capitalism as the cause of climate change. Well, it doesn't make sense to me. And Patrick Moore talks about this in his book. It doesn't make sense to me that a problem with the atmosphere, a scientific problem, that the solutions have to be expressed in terms of economic theory, especially Marxist economic theory. Everything goes to the left. But I think this fear mongering is being used as a way to transition large parts of the world, the quote unquote free market economies and democracies, which until about 15 years ago were functioning very well, to convert them to a new Marxist / feudalist / neo-fascist type of governance. And of course, I think the COVID-19 pandemic was the first stage of that. I think the environmental scare followed quickly afterwards, and I think now what we're going to get is it's going to come now to people's door. The wolf at the door is going to be the idea that people are going to, if you don't vote Liberal, you're going to lose your house. If you don't vote Liberal, you're going to lose your car. You won't be able to, hold on to your RSPs and so on. So I think this language of fear, we've been conditioned to do.
I'm confused. So if you don't vote for the current Liberal federal government, you're going to lose all these things. When I thought that they created this mess in the first place.
Right. Well, this is a tried and true strategy, as you know, David. I mean, this is what they do: is they leftist governments create a false catastrophe, and then they ride in on a white horse, which is actually black, and they promise a solution to the problem. And of course, the solution is always much, much worse than the original problem. And Liberals have been doing this over and over again, and this is why living in Canada right now is becoming more and more
the
difficult.
solution is always creating a bigger state, and we've got the money and
more power. But, trading freedom.
The question then is, I'm going to turn to both of you and
sure.
keep moving the discussion along, because it's a very good one. And that is, do we actually have any money left in Canada to spend with record deficits? I know this federal government alone, and we could pick on every province, but this federal government alone has spent more money than all the previous Canadian governments combined. I mean, it's a stunning fiscal legacy of insanity. So where is this country going on the economic side as they undertake not only the war on the middle class, but do they actually believe money grows on trees? What do you think, Peter?
Well, what we've seen is a massive expansion in the size of the government, and the most incompetent, distant level of government, of course, is the federal government. And that's where we've seen most of the damage. As you said, we have seen the debt doubled under this government. And again, the let's call it the fake COVID emergency was responsible for that. I think, again, you're talking about hopes for next year. We're about to release a very interesting commentary which says that the expansion of the federal civil service since 2015, essentially, if we brought the federal civil service back to the levels of 2015, we would basically eliminate probably most of the deficit. Okay. Now, so what we've seen is a massive expansion of government, and again, one of the key ideas at Frontier is the idea of optimum size of government, which should be about 30% of the economy, and we're now pushing. I think we're pushing 50%, and again, the expansion has happened at the federal level, and again, it's the most distant level, and it is not a rock star government. So we have lots of policies, central planning policies that are just not working, and they're causing a lot of damage.
Hmm. Well said. And in the meantime, we have a comment from the audience who said, I have worked in greenhouses and carbon dioxide is needed for growth every day. So, Leighton, what do you think about the economy of Canada? What's your sense of what's happening? And are they just going to keep spending the way they are?
I think that is the plan, unfortunately. And it seems as though the plan that they have, which is coming right out of the World Economic Forum and UN Agenda 2030, which is that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, is that ultimately they're going to drive private debt. We talk a lot about public debt. Private debt is even more of a problem, actually, especially for countries like China. China's economy is facing.
So what do you mean by private debt versus public debt? Can you explain that difference?
Well, public debt is the money that the government borrows, for example, to pay out CERB or whatever that they send to Ukraine or to Trudeau's friends. Private debt is what you and I take on our credit cards and our
Right.
on our HELOCs and things like that. And the ratio of private debt to equity for Canadians is one of the worst in the developed world.
Indeed, it is.
And we've been staving off, as I said, I talked about the wolf at the door. We've been staving it off for a long time. And I think, as awful as this sounds, and some people listening to this might think I'm a conspiracy theory, but I think the end game is to drive people into such severe state of debt that they will offer up their property rights and the rights to hold personal property in exchange for being taken care of by the state. And
Wow.
this
So
has a
Leighton,
lot of
you're
historical
okay. So
precedent.
just hold on for a sec. So you're saying that in many ways, these people in charge are quite comfortable, and you're suggesting something a little bit different that people might find hard to believe, is by design they're kind of pushing people into the ground, grinding them down in terms of all these issues around affordability for the middle class. We know the middle class is struggling. Our economy on the private sector side is limping along. The growth in government, as Peter outlined, is in government. It's not in the private sector. So we've got a kind of a train wreck happening here. And they might just like that because that's going to make them more dependent ultimately on the state. Is that what you're driving at, Leighton?
Yes, and if people watch closely what's happening with Alberta and Saskatchewan, where they're asserting provincial sovereignty over energy, this is playing out in real time because we know that the most valuable thing in the world to people and to countries is energy. Countries that have access to energy, to energy and low cost energy, are very comfortable and rich, and ones that do not are very poor. And there's a lot of countries in the world that want access to cheap, clean energy, which Canada has in abundance. But what you're seeing, my take on the situation with Danielle Smith and Mr. Moe in Saskatchewan, and to some extent, Manitoba's new premier, somewhat surprisingly, given his party, they're saying to the federal government, "Look, we're not buying into this. We're not buying into this climate scare stuff. We need cheap energy." Because without it, we don't really have a functioning economy.
Yeah, right on.
We can't produce food. We can't pay our bills. All of it.
Well, sorry, David, but you know that the largest source of tax revenue and high-paying jobs in Canada is what? It's the energy sector, and you have a federal policy of destroying the biggest, most important part of the economy. It is crazy, and again, when I talk to people who are saying, "Well, why is the dollar at 75 cents, 74 cents?" Well, it's because you're attacking, a great source of our living standard. And the cost is you have a lower dollar and you have a higher debt. And of course, we could really, go deep into this thing. But, if you suddenly subsidize everybody for not working as they did, borrow hundreds of billions of dollars, what do you end up with? You have inflation. So you have now houses that cost twice as much. And you have all the damage that's rippling through the economy. And again, this, I agree with you, Leighton, that this is not an accident. It is a deliberate thing. And, we have to be careful because we'll be called conspiracy theorists. But a lot of this stuff is, you know, a lot of this is deliberate as far as I'm concerned.
Peter, can I ask Peter a question? Sorry, go ahead.
It's very interesting. There's a comment from the audience that says,
Okay.
when the pandemic started, the government stated it was an opportunity for a great reset. Now, that's not necessarily all voices, but many voices did chime in on that. So that is food for thought. And related to that, when it comes to the audience, if you are appreciating the discussion, please give it a like. That helps with the thumbs up and the algorithms that the technological gods have instituted. So if you can give it a thumbs up, that would be appreciated. But Leighton, you wanted to ask Peter a question.
Right. I was just curious because Peter, you're in Manitoba. I know you follow this very closely. Are you surprised by the strong position that Manitoba's new premier has taken over, the climate tax and their plans to essentially target cheap, clean energy? Are you surprised by that, given that he's the leader of a leftist party that is essentially governed by Mr. Singh?
Well, so far he has surprised a lot of people, and a few days ago the price of gas fell by 14 cents a liter here in Manitoba.
Right.
So he's cutting taxes. And
why did that price go down, Peter? Can you
14
explain that?
cents a liter. So
but why did that happen? Can you explain that to the audience?
One of the NDP promises was to give people a break, and I guess that's what happened with Danielle Smith, Leighton in Alberta. There was or under Jason Kenney, they cut gas taxes. So again, is that good public policy or whatever? But the other thing that's surprising is, they have not really rolled back the Conservative promises to cut income tax at the bottom of the scale and so on.
Really?
So,
wow.
So hey, some of us are we're kind of holding our breath, and they have a lot of there's a lot of wokeism in the ranks there, a lot of identity politics activists and so on, a lot of teachers and so on. But so far, I think people have been pleasantly surprised. So let's see.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, I'd like to switch up the topics here. If we look at 2023, you can be rest assured a lot of people would say that in education, there's been a kind of a sea change that's happened in the form of parental rights. We've had literally hundreds of thousands, if millions, go on the march to say, hey, look, as parents, we count in education, and we don't want you as teachers or anyone else talking with our kids about their sexuality or gender. That's our job. Do you think the parental rights movement is looking back a kind of a sea change in terms of possible education? What do you think, Leighton?
I do. I think that a lot of this stuff is being rejected. Having said that, the rot of SOGI and these policies is very, very deep in our educational system. And I think that it's going to take a while to sort all the way through it. And it's not just at the K-12 level. I think maybe even a more serious problem is what's happening at our universities. The way that our teachers are being trained, because you can have the smartest kids in the world, and if you don't have good teachers, who are instructing the kids in things that are useful and are in, help to ensure human flourishing and their intellectual growth, you're not going to have much of a society. You're going to have a very dysfunctional society. And the Claudine Gay situation in Harvard is really shone a spotlight on how deep the rot is. So
what happened with Claudine Gay? She resigned, the president of Harvard, just the other week.
Well, she's a lady who was hired as the president of Harvard University, which is arguably the most plum job of any university in the Western world. And she was a rather mediocre academic in comparison to her peers. She'd only published about a dozen articles. It turns out that she was a serial plagiarist, but her chief claim to fame, or let's say qualification for the job, was that She's black and she's lesbian and she hates white people. She wrote
Oh, wow.
about this extensively. I think it shows, and I got into trouble for saying this a few years ago when I was talking about, the dangers of downstream problems of diversity, inclusion, equity. I was talking about in the context of judges. And we're seeing that problem in Canada too, by the way.
Yeah.
But when we start appointing people on the basis of their immutable characteristics and not based upon meritocratic principles, we're going to have we're headed for ruin. And
We're
so
going
we're
to see
seeing that at the top level.
So you're an advocate for merit, not the color of your skin. Is that right?
Well, Martin Luther King famously said, that race, your skin color should be the least important aspect of yourself. Most important thing is the content of your character. And actually, Claudine Gay turns out to be the complete inverse of Martin Luther King. In fact, Martin Luther King today would be considered a white supremacist.
Yeah, well, unbelievable. So when you look at the situation then, Peter, like Leighton's kind of shifted it across the education system, like public education, and then also on universities. And certainly when we look at, the date of October 7 with the terrorist attacks on Israel, it certainly peeled back a lot to see on universities and certainly in Canada as well. Do you think that, you've been around for a long time, Peter, looking at these issues. Do you think universities have rabies or do they have cancer?
I think cancer. I think you have to start again, but I would take what Leighton is saying and apply it across the entire public sector. And what we're seeing is we call them legacy. I call them legacy public sector organizations. But now you're hiring people not based on talent or competence. You're basically checking off boxes around intersectionality and so on. So you have these low performing organizations, which are going to become even worse. Okay, and it's actually quite frightening. And we can also get into, as you mentioned, professional associations, dentists, law society, College of Surgeon, the doctors. They're all training people.
So just to clarify, so in the wink of an eye, we've gone from talking about the kids in elementary school and the parental rights movement, and then all of a sudden Leighton said, whoa, it's to the universities. And then Peter, you said it's every public sector organization, including the professional associations, which are really kind of like a cousin of the public sector organizations, because they're kind of given this special privilege by the state to rule themselves or govern themselves. So it's kind of like, wow, this virus has kind of spread everywhere. That's basically what you guys are saying now.
Well, no, but it goes further if you want to get into DEI and ESG in the corporate sector.
Well, wait a second. No, what is ESG for people listening? What are you talking about?
Environmental social governance, but it also has aspects of DEI in it, diversity and so on. So what we're seeing is corporations are also engaging in that. And again, we had a discussion this morning about a bank that's not going to be investing in Alberta because of ESG. And again, Alberta needs to fight back and say, all right, well, we'll do what the American states are doing.
So what does that mean?
What's that?
Can you give us detail on that, Peter? What does that mean in terms of this bank in Alberta? That's an interesting story.
Well, ESG is essentially a backdoor way of fighting or destroying the energy sector. Okay. And it has all these tenets of global warming and climate change and so on. What is happening in the United States now is I think there's 22 states, energy states, North Dakota, Texas, Oklahoma. They have passed legislation against ESG. And if you want to do any business, let's say in Texas, and you're pushing ESG, you're just out of luck. You are cut out. And again, I think that needs to start happening here. I see the corporate sector naively following these trends. It seems like we lagged the U.S. by a few years, Leighton. And again, I think that we've seen peak woke in the U.S. and I think you're going to see, DEI and ESG. There was a story on the front page of the Wall Street Journal on everybody getting out of ESG because it's a loser. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we're going to go that way too. The issue is our political class needs to, not lag as much as they do. They need to get in front of this. It's a great opportunity. So,
well, let's hope you're right. I mean, if you look at it from a Canadian's point of view, people need to realize that your pension funds, your investment could all be following these sneaky ESG indexes, which are really about a woke social justice indicator. They're about using your money for woke causes. So this is a very important topic, and study after study shows that the performance of these funds for ESG funds is much, much lower. So, if I invest my money in something, I want a good performance and I expect them to follow the law and to be respectful as good citizens, but I don't want them to follow some kind of woke cause. So I think that's this is a big issue. But the point is that this virus, this ideology, this radical Marxism, really, that's what it is kind of pernicious, and it's going everywhere. But the good news is that there's lights being shined on it now, and people are starting to wake up. Is that right, Leighton?
Well, I think, first of all, just to finish off Peter's point, this ESG is not profitable for people like you and me who are investors, but it's very profitable for certain people.
Indeed, yes.
And we just went through. We just
like BlackRock.
Yes, and governments. Okay, so for example, we just went through. It was just celebrated the other day, the 59th anniversary of Lyndon Johnson. Announcing all of the
Great Society,
affirmative action, the Great Society.
Yeah.
And this has been the most incredible transfer of wealth. Prior to 1964, it really wasn't possible for politicians to get rich while in office. But these programs, because of the money changing hands back and forth from public and private sector, and all the kickbacks on these programs, politicians have been able to become enormously wealthy. The best example, I guess, would be, looking at someone like Joe Biden, and the influence trading, influence peddling. But the other side of this, which as you said, is very pernicious, is it, these DEI programs and affirmative action, which is what we used to call it, actually harm the people. And Dr. Thomas Sowell talks about this a lot. He's really the best authority on this, but he has a statistic. This is very shocking. Between 1945 and 1960, the GDP and the household income for Black people in the United States rose more than it had during any other time in the history of the United States. In fact, by 1960, Black families, contiguous families, husband, wife, 3.5 kids, let's say, were doing almost as well, and in some cases better than white people. For example, in the South, places like Georgia, they were dominating things like the construction industry. Well, by 1970, the whole picture had changed. And now we have a situation where, and this is true in Canada with Indigenous people, and now with mass immigrants, where there's a great profitability to this for people working in government. And you're seeing more and more people now, instead of in the old days where a very distinguished business person or whatever would go into politics later in life. Now we're seeing people coming directly out of university, like this young man, Mr. Pedno, who's the second in command for the Green Party. He's telling us, he's quoting Karl Marx and saying, we're going to redistribute your wealth. This is somebody who hasn't produced any wealth, obviously. But that's what we're dealing with right now. We have people, in their early 20s entering politics because they see it as a way to get rich.
Yeah, right on. So good comments. And speaking of comments, I have some from the audience. One is, I have just seen a news report that in British Columbia, they're going to start allowing minors to be given fentanyl and other drugs without.
I saw that story. Yeah, just awful.
That's horrible. It's hard to believe. Another comment is a friend at the University of Brandon in Manitoba has become an elementary school teacher and is utterly shocked about what they're being taught in terms of gender equity focused programs across the board. And meanwhile, no fundamentals are being taught. So there's a lot that people are starting to realize. They can't believe that this is what's happening in their schools. So I think that's a really good story, right? That's one of our hopes, is that citizens find out more they're able to become more informed, and they can start weighing in. They can start calling their representative and saying, hey, this is unacceptable. Maybe they run for the school board. But speaking of school boards, we've had quite a phenomenon across the country in Canada of school board trustees speaking up and saying, you know what, we don't like what's going on. We should be focusing on the ABCs, and let's respect parental rights. But a number of those trustees have been almost banned or taken down by fellow trustees who are real believers in this nonsense, and by their provincial masters for that matter. But so what's going on there? Do you see any hope? I think of Francine Champagne, for example, a school board trustee in Winnipeg, who was royally mistreated by her school board in Louis Saint Riel in Winnipeg. Do you see any hope there? What do you think, Peter and Leighton?
I don't. I think it's very bad. In fact, I was at a social occasion a few days ago with a retired school trustee, and she said it is getting worse. And the whole discussion around pronouns and so on, there's a certain flag that's everywhere, etc. So no, I think this is really a front line. Wow. And again, it's an opportunity for the politicians to deal with it. And again, we can deal with it in bigger ways of we could be encouraging charter schools and vouchers and at Frontier we want big transformative policies. Maybe if you want to send your kid to a public school that's extremely progressive, that's up to you. But if you want to send them somewhere else, the money follows you. And so I think in terms of hopes and opportunities, I think there are answers that we should be talking about.
So one of the answers you're suggesting is that, hey, let's respect people's choice, and that parents are in charge ultimately of their children's education. So give the money to them in the form of school vouchers, and then let's just bypass this whole woke public bureaucracy, and let's build the school system by parental choice, like they do in Sweden, as an example.
Well, Sweden, Holland, Denmark, the money goes to the parents. It's a voucher system, and actually in Sweden you have chains of competing schools, private schools that are out there advertising to get people's kids. And again, the role of the government is quality control, etc. But this is all seen as radical here for some reason, but it's very common in Europe.
Yeah, so let's learn from those examples. And if I look to Alberta, Leighton, we see all kinds of the success of charter schools that are, so people can start up a charter school. We've got a number of friends who've done that. Like, I think of the classical schools that are emerging now in Alberta. People have that choice. They want that. What do you think, Leighton?
Well, I think the charter schools is one aspect. The other one, though, that I think is really growing here in Alberta, I don't know if it is in other parts of the country, is homeschooling.
Indeed.
For example, my son is in 11th grade. He has the misfortune to have his father as his social studies and English and religion teacher. But Koinonia is a Christian-based program that's sort of skating between the lines. But it's the example of parents taking a very keen interest in their children's education, and this is something that I think has to happen. Our friend Preston Manny talks about this a lot in his books. He has a book called Do Something, which says, he describes things you can do every day to get involved in your community and make a difference. And I've even seen more and more parents doing that. One thing that I would say as an apology for people who are school trustees, we talked off the top of this discussion about the culture of fear that is set in Canada. And I think that a lot of the trustees, I think the rank and file trustees, maybe don't subscribe to this stuff. They don't believe in the pronouns. But, kind of reminds me of some books I read some years ago by Elie Wiesel about the period during Nazi Germany, where something as simple as forgetting to do the Hitler salute could get you in a great deal of trouble. And a lot of these people, their reputations depend upon them mouthing the words, saying the right words, having the flag up in the classroom. And then we see what happens to this poor lady you were describing, who courageously step out from the crowd, and and they're greeted by a shower of ideological bullets. And so I think this culture of fear is very much alive, and as Peter said, throughout our institutions. It's a very dangerous thing. It's something that we're going to have to address in Canada if we're going to restore peace, order, and good government.
I think you're right. And I think part of the irony is that if people and the leaders in the public education system do not listen carefully, they will risk losing the whole system. I think our fellow in education, Michael Zagstra, who's also a proud public educator, he would say we risk losing the public education system if we can't work with parents. We know that some people are confused about their gender. So, that's great. Let them work with their counselor and in a supportive way. But what they're doing here is something else. It's kind of an activism that is infecting really the core curriculum in a way that detracts from really the performance of the education system. And so I think that's true. If we don't listen carefully, we end up losing the trust and credibility of parents. And if you lose that, then the public system is going to be ended.
Well, you've talked of the Long March and how they've captured these public institutions, and that's what's happened. So again, I think in terms of hopes, and I don't know, Leighton, if you have these hopes as well, but I don't see. I think you just need some strong leadership, and you need policy capacity. Okay, that you can go after these things, and like, to me, the climate stuff is easy. You just say we don't believe it, it's bullshit, sorry, and you move on and you develop your opportunities. Okay, I think our issue today in Canada is that we need to have some stronger leadership, really, and
so what do you think is the answer? That simple? We just need strong leadership to come in and just say this is the way it is?
Well, conviction politicians, Margaret Thatcher, Roger Douglas, they're intelligent. They know they have, essentially, we know from history that Marxism and communism and socialism it's a recipe for failure. Okay, so let's, we're a rich, prosperous place. Why are we embracing these policies that are, gonna destroy our living standards? Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you think the solution is, Leighton, as we look at a number of these issues? Does it really hinge on leadership?
I think leadership is an important component. I think it also has to be connected to a source of ideas, because I with apologies to politicians who are listening to this, folks, I hate to burst your bubble, but politicians are not the sharpest knives in the drawer. Most politicians, they're like that person in high school who wanted to run for class president. They need people who are feeding them good ideas. They need things like the Frontier Center. They need things like the Alberta First, which is a very, very strong engine for producing the policies that are being promulgated into law in Alberta. And it's those ideas and the connection between strong leadership, what Peter called, conviction leadership. I would go a step further and say servant leadership. If we have good ideas, ones that are focused on enhancing freedom and human flourishing and improving the lives of Canadians, we have. I agree with Peter. We're very wealthy, not just in terms of natural resources. We're very wealthy in terms of human potential. We have some of the smartest people in the world in this country. And we can develop, and we are developing, great ideas. They're just not finding their way into policy at the federal government level. Conrad Black, actually, shameless plug, I just published today a commentary on his most recent book, which, like everything he does, is brilliant. But Conrad Black talks about this in his books. He has this optimistic view of Canada's future, that our best days are ahead of us. And he connects that to a true representation of our past. We have a very proud history in this country that we don't talk about, that we're trying to erase. And I think that's part of it too. We have to take pride in our history. We have to say that we're a great country full of wonderful people. We've done a lot of great things. We help a lot of people around the world. We're generally good to our neighbors. We have tremendous potential. And I think that if we start thinking in that way and get those kind of ideas into policy and then to the government level, I think that this thing could change very, very quickly.
I can't resist this. Today is John A. Macdonald Day. Do we know?
Yes.
That?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So the first Prime Minister of Canada, who did all sorts of great things to make Canada a successful country. There is actually a name that today is John A. Macdonald's Day. There was some kind of a cabinet thing passed in 2002. Now, Sir John A. is being canceled everywhere. Yeah. And again, we have the Dundas Square being canceled. We have Bishop Grandin being canceled here, which is ridiculous. Now, I went to pick up my car and I still see the Bishop Grandin signs up. But again, it's part of a bigger plan to dilute the culture and, bring in cultural Marxism. Sorry.
Yeah, to really not actually reflect on history, but to revise history in a very dark way that we are ashamed of our identity. Yeah. And this is actually quite devious, and it's quite disturbing. So we need to challenge those kinds of persons that seek to rewrite our history. And I just wish the Canadian Historical Society would speak up more. But I think some are, but it's a long process. And I think you're right that people maybe are a bit afraid of being labeled, but this is an important time for our country. And if we don't speak up, it's all over. And that's really, I think, where a lot of the hope I see. So we're kind of getting towards the last part of our discussion. It's been a very animated discussion. I do have a comment from a member in our audience who says parents shouldn't have to be elected to school boards to have a voice. It should be incumbent upon boards, get this, to have open forums to discover and implement
what a great point.
The ideas consensus of the parents. Wow, imagine that. So local democracy matters. And I've always believed that local government, school boards are by far the most important levels of government. And I think that that kind of involvement is being lost. And so that is so critical as we nurture the next generation of people at all levels of government. It's often through the local government.
So David, this actually is an important thing, which is that we need to have subsidiarity in our public policy, which is things should be happening as close to the front lines as possible. Okay. And the worst level is to have Ottawa and the federal government getting involved in what kind of electricity system you have, what kind of car you drive, whether you can have plastic straws. Like, sorry, what we need to do is have a radical reduction in the size of and influence of the federal government. I'm guessing Leighton would agree with that.
I totally agree. And but there's an onus that has to be placed on people. I'll give an example. I was at a recent speaking engagement, and I asked people for a show of hands. How many of you think that you have concerns about what kind of books are in your children's school libraries? And most every hand in the place went up. And then I said, okay, how many of you are serving right now on a school library board? No hands.
Nobody. Yeah.
That's the problem. And these library board, and I went and looked at my library school board, my local one here in Cold Lake, and I saw two people who are card-carrying NDP Rachel Notley supporters. So it's not hard to find these people, but the problem is when the good people aren't there, the bad ones, sort of fill the vacuum. The universe abhors a vacuum. And so what I would say to people listening to this, if you want to make a difference in your community, in the words of Preston Manning, do something. We still live in a country where it's very easy to get involved at the local level and to do something. everybody has unique talents, things that they can offer.
Yeah. Right
and
on.
and everybody's contribution is valuable, except for the leftists. We want to leave those out. But those people who want to offer something good and helpful, it wants to improve the lives of Canadians. Those are the people we need on these boards.
So
Although
so to be clear, if you're not speaking up, if you're not volunteering, if you're not involved in a community, you're part of the problem, aren't you?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
It's like that meme. It's like that meme. You guys have seen this one of Nazi Germany, where there's the one guy circled in the crowd and he doesn't have his hand up in the Hitler salute, and it says, "Be that guy." Yeah, that's
Exactly.
that's what it is.
Well, and I think this fits in well then with the revelation I think a lot of people have had the last few years alone, is that a lot of our elites are really in a kind of a cushioned bubble where they are not really relating to working people's lives of affordability, but they're content to have people just give up and not say anything, to be demoralized, so they can just run your life from A to Z. Is that kind of a fair comment?
I think that's definitely what government wants. They want us to surrender our freedom in the name of security. Is a famous Benjamin Franklin quotation. If you give up a little bit of freedom for some security, you end up with neither. And that's what we're seeing in Canada right now. That's what CERB was about. And that's what UBI, Universal Basic Income, is going to be about. And I think ultimately, I think where this federal government is going is, I think that they have a plan to offer people individual debt bailouts in exchange for basically surrendering all of their personal property rights. And that's horrifying. It's horrifying because if you look historically in countries where we don't have personal property rights guaranteed, that's a fundamental human right, in my view. And in countries where you don't have that historically, you have mass murder.
Right.
Simple as that.
So as you look to 2024, I do want to ask each of you briefly, where do you see the largest hope that's emerging here? Where do you see hope for 2024? Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Peter. No, I'll go first if you want.
Well, again, I think we are at peak woke, and people are now aware that we have a huge problem throughout the system, particularly universities and so on. Our issue really is, do the governments have the policy capacity to make the necessary changes? I think that's our issue. Okay, and we all know very good politicians, but they're getting their advice sometimes from their buddy who ran a rental car company or whatever. Okay, no, you need heavyweight policy advisors, and of course, running a think tank, you should be talking to think tanks and so on, because they have the answers.
Okay, thank you, Peter. What about you, Leighton?
Well, I think one of the things that I'm going to be watching most closely is public safety and security. I had a very interesting conversation with our friend Colonel Dave Redmond, who talked about this, and we're seeing this manifested. And a lot of these things sort of are like streams that flow into the same river. And but the disintegration of our institutions is also happening at things like policing. Yeah. So, for example, there was a story that came out today that these pro-Palestinian protesters are actually very highly organized. They advance, pull up. They've got flags and signs. They've got organizers from Plenty Collective wearing orange vests controlling the crowds. So these people are being paid. And what we're having in Canada right now is, the police are selectively enforcing the law. They're bringing, Uber Eats and Tim Hortons coffee out to protesters. And then at the same time, we have somebody some poor guy in Toronto, in Peterborough, actually, had somebody come in to rob his store, and with a rubber bat, and he was able to get the bat away from him and subdue the attacker. And they're charging the store owner. This is what Canada. One of the things that we've cherished throughout our history is having a safe society where we can move around. We don't have to worry about a lot of things that unfortunately people do in places like Palestine. But this is disintegrating. I'm hopeful that we're going to take back our communities. The Toronto police have been under very close scrutiny and criticism. Some of it justified, a lot of it justified. They're saying now.
Just to give an example, in that case where there was that protest by Avenue Road, and I know that area well, the Toronto police chief did come forward and apologize that the officer really didn't have good judgment, and so people mean well, but like what a almost a bizarre.
And they're now
decision.
saying you're right, David. The Toronto police are now saying they're going to bar anti-Israel protests from Avenue Road Bridge. In New York City, they were denying access to an important area, a Jewish community, and the B'nai B'rith. They're going to court to prevent these. So I think that we're going to see people, instead of relying upon government to secure public safety, I see now we're going to have not necessarily chaos in the streets, vigilante justice, but I think individual citizens and groups of citizens taking action to secure the safety of their streets. That's something that is an encouraging trend that I hope is going to unfold in 2024.
Well, that's fascinating because in Langley, BC, this last week, there were 27 fathers that banded together because there was supposedly a concern about break and enters. The police were not able to deal with this for months. So they organized. This was on Christmas Eve, and they went out, and sure enough, they found a theft occurring in a florist shop of all things. And the fathers then were able to notify the police. They came in and did the arrest, but it's not like to my knowledge, the fathers didn't touch the guy.
Right.
But the point is, they mobilized to almost like an active neighborhood watch kind of operation. So
neighborhood watch has kind of disappeared, hasn't it? Remember the neighborhood watch?
The police have been so hobbled by their decision makers, their persons in authority, for fear of offending anybody. So it's a much longer discussion, but very interesting discussion today, gentlemen. Leighton Gray and of course Peter Holle. We're delighted that we could have this conversation together, and also with the audience. Really interesting comments that came forward today. And again, make sure you like the discussion, pass it on to friends. But we cherish the opportunity to be fellow citizens together, and we don't take this nation for granted. And so this conversation about hopes and fears for 23 and 24 is so timely. And speaking of which, there is an offer by the Frontier Center. You can look on our website and put down a PDF file of a special calendar in honor of Sir John A. Macdonald.
And happy birthday, Sir John A.
Canadian hero.
Yeah,
If I could, David, I'd just like to express my gratitude to the Frontier Center for being so supportive of me and the work that I've done for publishing some of my articles. I'm very proud, and I feel privileged to be part of the Frontier. So I want to thank everyone for your support. And a teaser, I have over the holidays, I've got a manuscript of my first book. It's called Collected Gray Matter. It's about twice the size it needs to be, but I hope to release that sometime in the spring, and I hope that the Frontier will help me promote that.
Well, we're looking forward to it, and thank you.
And I think you're coming to Winnipeg, and we're going to have an event or two with you as well, Leighton. And I've already mentioned it to a few people, and they're extremely excited. So you are a bit of a rock star. And
oh, wow.
We're actually very fortunate that we have you in the Frontier loop.
All right. So wrapping things up, thanks so much, Peter and Leighton. We're really glad that you could join us, the audience. And be sure to join us next week on Thursday at the same time for live on YouTube and on X. And have a terrific day and a great 2024.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.